Hey guys, hello and welcome to Speedy Medical. So you are watching the gastrointestinal pathology, and in the first video of this part we discussed about some disorders of the esophagus, like what is the Zenker's diverticulum, like what is the Mallory-Weiss syndrome, what is the Boerhaave syndrome, what is the tracheoesophageal fistula. Now this is the second part of the gastrointestinal pathology, and specifically in this video we are talking about the rest of esophageal disorders. So firstly I'll discuss about the esophageal varices, and secondly I'll discuss about achalasia cardia. So in this video we'll be primarily discussing the two things, which are the esophageal varices and the achalasia cardia. So I'll try to make it as simple as possible, and I believe that if you watch this video you will be able to solve all the questions regarding the esophageal varices and the achalasia cardia. So let's discuss the esophageal varices first. Now esophageal varices is a condition in which, if we look at the lower part of the esophagus or the lower one third of the esophagus, there are dilated esophageal veins. And if these dilated esophageal veins are present, we call it as the esophageal varices. Now, if we look at the anatomy, this is the esophagus, and this is the stomach, and this is the gastroesophageal junction. Now, if you recall your anatomy, you know that the lower part of the esophagus is a site of portocaval anastomosis. Now, what is this portocaval anastomosis? See, in our body we have something which is called as the portal vein, and we have something which is called as the inferior vena cava. Now the portal vein is carrying the blood from our colon, our small intestine, and some other parts like spleen into what is called as the portal vein, and ultimately the portal vein, it will drain into the liver. While the inferior vena cava, it is also bringing the deoxygenated blood from the parts of body like the kidneys and some other parts, and eventually it will drain into what is called as the right atrium. Now what happens over there is that at some sites there are anastomoses between this portal vein and the inferior vena cava, so that if by some reason the obstruction or the pressure inside the portal vein increases, the blood can flow into what is called as the inferior vena cava via these anastomoses. Now these portocaval anastomoses are found at various sites, but for understanding the esophageal varices, you just need to understand that at the lower part of the esophagus, we have the portocaval anastomosis, and if the portal hypertension is there or the portal pressure is increased, then the blood from the portal vein, it will come and it will start flowing in the retrograde manner via these esophageal veins, and as a result of that the esophageal veins will be dilated, and these are called as the esophageal varices. And these esophageal varices, they are located in the submucosa in the lower one third of the esophagus. Now the most important clinical condition in which we find esophageal varices is the cirrhosis. So if we talk about the cirrhosis, cirrhosis is the end stage liver disease, and as a result of the cirrhosis, the portal vein is not able to flow right into the liver, and there is portal hypertension. So there will occur the retrograde flow of the blood, and it will eventually come in the lower esophageal veins and will cause the dilation, resulting in the esophageal varices. So in case of cirrhosis, we find the esophageal varices. Now the esophageal varices, they can be diagnosed via the endoscopy, and when we will do the endoscopy, we will find that the esophageal veins, they are dilated. Now the esophageal varices, they are asymptomatic. That is, if the patient has esophageal varices, most of the patient, they will be asymptomatic, but in some patient the veins, they may rupture, and as a result of the rupture of the veins there will be bleeding, and whenever there is bleeding in the vomiting, it is called as hematemesis. So there will be something which is called as the hematemesis in case of the esophageal varices. Now you tell me that in case of Mallory-Weiss syndrome there was also hematemesis, but in that case the hematemesis was painful, but in this case the hematemesis is painless. So the patient will have the painless hematemesis, and hematemesis is one of the terminal cause of death in case of the patient of cirrhosis. So these patients, they have eventually the hematemesis resulting in the blood loss, the loss of factors, and eventually they'll die. So hematemesis is the cause of death in case of the patient with advanced liver disease or end stage liver disease, which is the cirrhosis. So this was all about the esophageal varices, the pathophysiology of esophageal varices. Let's talk little bit about the treatment options which are there in case of the esophageal varices. Now if we talk about the treatment options in case of esophageal varices, we have something which is called as the esophageal band ligation. Now in this case, what we will be doing is that we will be ligating these esophageal varices or the veins, and this is called as esophageal band ligation. Secondly, there is something which is called as sclerotherapy. In this case, we will be giving some agent which is called as sclerosing agent or fibrosing agent, which will induce the fibrosis in these dilated veins, and hence the risk of rupture, it will decrease. And finally there is a drug which is called as octreotide, and this octreotide is a somatostatin analog, and what it will do is it will decrease the portal blood flow, and as a result of the decrease in the portal blood flow, the blood which is flowing to these veins, it will also decrease, and hence there will be decreased risk or decreased bleeding from those esophageal veins, and hence the condition will be treated. So these are the major treatment options in case of esophageal varices. The next pathology that we will be discussing over here is the achalasia cardia. So let's talk about the achalasia cardia. Now if we talk about the achalasia is a condition in which there is failure of relaxation. So there is failure of relaxation in this case. Now to understand the pathophysiology of achalasia cardia, we need to understand the histology and what are the various layers in the esophagus and what are the various components that are present over there. So first of all, we have the layer which is called as the mucosa. Next we have the layer which is called as the submucosa. Now after the submucosa we have the muscularis propria with inner circular layer and outer longitudinal layer. So we have the inner circular and the outer longitudinal layer. Now this muscularis propria, within the muscularis propria we have a nerve plexus which is called as the myenteric nerve plexus. And in the submucosa we have also a plexus which is called as the Meissner's plexus. So you have two nerve plexus in the esophageal wall. One is the myenteric nerve plexus and second is the Meissner's plexus. The myenteric nerve plexus is one which is found in the muscularis layer between the inner circular and outer longitudinal layer, whereas the Meissner's plexus is something which is found in the submucosa. Now in order to understand further, you need to know what are the functions of myenteric nerve plexus and what are the function of the Meissner's plexus. Now if we talk about the myenteric nerve plexus, it controls the motility. Now it will control the motility of esophagus and the peristaltic movements and the peristalsis within the esophagus. It will be controlled by the myenteric nerve plexus. Whereas if we talk about the Meissner's plexus, it will control the secretions within the esophagus of various glands, goblet cells, etc. Also it will control the blood flow and it will control the absorption. Now you might be thinking, where is the esophageal absorption taking place? No, I am not talking about absorption in the esophagus, rather I am talking about the absorption throughout the GI tract, because these myenteric nerve plexus and Meissner's nerve plexus, they are not found in the esophagus alone, they are found in the whole GI tract, because the histology is almost the same except for the mucosa which shows changes and the type of epithelium. So you know what is the myenteric nerve plexus and you know what are the Meissner's plexus. Now in case of achalasia cardia, what happens over there is that there occur the loss of ganglionic cell. Now, what are these ganglionic cells? The ganglionic cells, they are special kind of cells which are found in the myotonic nerve plexus. So in case of achalasia cardia, there occur the loss of ganglionic cell in the myotonic nerve plexus. Now, as a result of the loss of ganglionic cell, there will be something which is called as inhibition, loss of inhibition. So there will be something which is called as loss of inhibitory neurotransmitters like the nitric oxide and the VIP. Now you do not need to know what is the loss of inhibitory neurotransmitter and what is the further pathophysiology. You just need to know that in case of achalasia cardia, there occur the loss of ganglionic cells in the myotonic plexus, and as a result of the loss of ganglionic cells in the myotonic plexus, the peristalsis is not regulated, or you can say that there is no peristalsis, rather there is absent peristalsis and there is failure. Failure of relaxation. There is failure of relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter. You know that this is the esophagus and this is the stomach, and in between the esophagus and the stomach there is a sphincter which is called as the lower esophageal sphincter, and in order for the food to pass from the esophagus into the stomach, this sphincter needs to be relaxed or needs to be opened, whereas in case of achalasia cardia, there is no relaxation of this lower esophageal sphincter just because of the loss of ganglionic cells from the myotonic plexus. So since there is no relaxation of lower esophageal sphincter, there will be accumulation of food behind, and there will be something which is called as the dysphagia, which is the difficulty in swallowing. Now since there is no peristalsis, so therefore there will be dysphagia for solids because the solids cannot move down, and obviously there will be dysphagia for liquids also because for the movement of liquids you also need to have the peristalsis. So therefore there will be dysphagia for solids and liquid both in case of achalasia cardia, and this is an important concept because often you are asked about whether in case of achalasia there is dysphagia for solids or solids and liquids. So you have to say there is a dysphagia for solids and liquids both. There is failure of relaxation, there is dysphagia for solids and liquids. If we do something which is called as the esophageal manometry, in which case we note the pressures within the esophagus. Now you tell me, if the lower esophageal sphincter is constantly closed and it is not relaxing in the lower part of the esophagus, whether the pressure will be high or it will be low. So obviously, since the food is backing up, the things are not moving forward, the pressure will be increased. So if we do the esophageal manometry, the pressure will be increased in case of achalasia cardia, and this is something which is diagnostic. And last, there is something which is called as bird beak appearance. Now what is this bird beak appearance? Now you know that since the lower esophageal sphincter it is not relaxing, so the food will start accumulating like this. And now if over this we give something called as the barium will accumulate and it will give a classic appearance of bird's beak, and therefore it is called as bird beak appearance on barium swallow. So these are the typical findings that are found in case of achalasia cardia. And talking about one more thing, that is the achalasia cardia, it increases the risk of squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus. So this is the whole pathophysiology of achalasia cardia. Let's talk about what are the causes of achalasia, like why is there achalasia at the first place. So if we talk about the causes of achalasia, the achalasia can be of two types. One is the primary achalasia, in which the cause is not known. Therefore we can say that it is idiopathic. And there is something which is called as secondary achalasia, and in case of secondary achalasia we know what is the cause. The secondary achalasia is often caused by infection with a protozoa which is called as Trypanosoma cruzi. So there is an infection with Trypanosoma cruzi, and as a result of the infection with Trypanosoma cruzi, there is the destruction of ganglionic cell. Now you know that in case of achalasia, the primary pathogenesis is the destruction of ganglionic cells, and since the Trypanosoma cruzi is causing the destruction of ganglionic cell, therefore it will cause achalasia. So this is the basic thing about the achalasia. Don't forget that achalasia, it increases the risk of squamous cell carcinoma, and what is the typical finding in the barium swallow, which is called as the bird's beak appearance, and what is the basic pathogenesis. And also in case of esophageal varices, don't forget what are the treatment options, what is the band ligation, what is the sclerotherapy, and what is octreotide. So this was all about for today's video. I hope you like the video. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel and also spread the word among your friends. Thank you so much for watching the video.